Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I have Amber Dembowski here to talk about sustaining and thriving in the workplace, especially with teachers, and kind of dealing with all that stress that we know teachers are dealing with and the burnout they experience. So I'm really glad to have Amber here. Amber, I believe the way I met you was that when I was an elected school board member in Bellevue, you started as a principal there.
You're exactly right.
And that's how I knew you. And then we reconnected recently. You've got some really great things going on. And so it's been a joy to kind of reconnect and learn about what you're up to. And you've recently left being a principal. You started your own business and you've got some really innovative work that kind of aligns to the work that I do as well, with just a different avenue of teacher wellness. So welcome. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I'll let you kind of tell us a little bit more about your background and go from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be on, Cindy. It's great to be here with someone who has the same mission and the same desires as me to support public schools and public education in such positive ways. I think what's interesting to me is that the neuroscience surrounding well-being in the workplace has been around for years, and yet the well-being of our teachers is probably the least discussed element
Yep.
when we're talking about school improvement.
Mhm.
And I honestly almost changed the title of this presentation because when people think about happiness in the workplace,
Mhm.
it kind of has this connotation of being this foo-foo idea, or, oh, you're just being naive, or maybe it's a nice to have, but not anything that you need to have for school success. But I'm going to talk you through this webinar and give you some strategies to support school improvement in ways that maybe you hadn't thought of before. And the bottom line is everyone wants to be happy. It may be cloaked in other words. I have a teacher that often says, I just want to be content. Or you may hear people say, I just want to feel appreciated, or I just
Mhm.
want to be respected. But when we unwrap that, really all they're saying is they want to be happy in their work. And yet, even though that's the case, we're still really struggling with that. So 54% of us are still not flourishing, we're lacking enthusiasm, and we're not productively engaged at work. But it's not because people aren't trying. Principals are working their butts off, trying to improve that school culture, making sure that their teachers are happy. And so, Cindy, can you, or even any of the guests, can you think of things that principals are doing, knowing that it's something that's going to make their teachers happy?
Well, I'm going to just speak from something I've observed and I observed recently. And I did a presentation today on professionalism in the workplace. And it made me really think about how, just at a very basic level, and this isn't a big thing, but I remember when I started teaching where we were literally, you had to wear like nylons. Yes, I am that old, but like, there was some sort of weird expectation of clothing. And I taught kindergarten. I was sitting on the floor, right? Just being able to wear something comfortable, because you're literally, as a kindergarten teacher, a human Kleenex. Like, people are wiping their nose on me. Why would I wear, nylons? And I mean, of course, that does provide a barrier to my skin. No, I mean, that's one benefit, but so uncomfortable. So I will say just something simple as recognizing that it is a profession and you can be professional wearing clothes that are comfortable.
Absolutely. And
Just
all of
something
those
simple.
matter. Yeah. So Jeans Day, we hear a lot about
Right.
Jeans Days, bringing in donuts or extra treats. We hear a lot about those things. There are also other things that principals are doing, paying extra attention on showing appreciation.
Yes.
And so as you're working through all of these things that principals are working really hard at to make the workplace a happy place for everybody, you just want to keep in mind that we need to consider, of those things, None of it's bad. It's all
Right.
good. But of those things, what sustains happiness over time and what do we have the most influence over?
And I will say on a higher level, opposite of, jeans and comfy clothes, offering teachers being responsive to their needs and school districts even having like an employee assistance program or somewhere where people that have just they need somebody to talk to and it's free service. Or I know in Nebraska, I believe for even counseling for teachers, they no longer have to pay the copay. If I hope that's correct. But just something, even insurance providers understanding that that's a big deal. I mean, that's a big deal. So, yeah, those are on the higher level, but obviously those aren't necessarily things principals can control. And so that's not necessarily my expertise to know what principals do. So I'm glad to hear some things that you have more of the expertise on.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I know what it's like to wake up in the morning and have a gazillion teachers call in sick and there's no subs. And I know what it's like to walk
Mhm.
into a classroom and to see a teacher sitting there crying. I know what it's like to go home at the end of the day covered in bruises and bite marks. And so this webinar that I'm sharing with you and the strategies that I'm going to share with you, they're not going to bring more subs to you. They aren't going, there's no magic wand to improve the behaviors in your building, but the strategies will give you ways to develop the happiness in the workplace and to develop the resilience and the grit that's needed to at least walk away at the end of the day feeling a little bit stronger to handle all of those things.
But I will say a happy workplace does attract people to want to work there. And so
Absolutely.
I do think it would attract substitutes. I mean, who wants to go and work someplace where everybody's miserable? I will suffer through a really, really hard day if I like the people I'm around. And so I don't think we should underestimate the power of a good work environment and happy people, because I think it's a huge recruitment tool that is totally
Sure.
underutilized.
I agree. There's so much truth in that. I have Maslow's hierarchy here, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. I think all educators are very familiar with this theory. I was a principal for 10 years, and when I would kick off my meetings with teachers at the beginning of every year, I made sure that we reviewed Maslow's hierarchy because I always wanted to make sure that our students' basic needs were met, that they felt safe and happy at school, that we were building those strong connections, that they felt loved and they had a sense of belonging within our building. Because I knew without that, the learning wasn't going to take place. So this was always a reminder every single year. And it's familiar to so many people, but where I think we miss the mark is Maslow's hierarchy wasn't created just for students. Maslow's hierarchy applies to all human beings,
Mm,
including adults and teachers.
yeah.
Uh, and when I was doing my research on teacher well-being, I came across this quote and I loved it because it was just so frank and so blunt. Until teachers are supported in developing a work environment equal to the one they are required to provide for their students, efforts to improve schools and ultimately the education of students will continue to be marginally successful. And I know you already know this, but there's a lot of stats and research to back this.
Yeah.
So 75% of our teachers are experiencing health issues due to stress, and 29% are experiencing PTSD. And what I found astounding is that 29% of that 29%, that's 17% higher than war veterans. I think that is,
Crazy.
it's so crazy. So
That's a
crazy.
new stat for me. I have not seen that. So that's new information for me.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that it's isolated to certain age groups or years of experience, but truly the research tells us differently. It's
Okay.
impacting everyone. So new or younger teachers that are coming into the profession now, they're experiencing anxiety at 134% more than newer younger teachers coming into the profession back in 2010. And I know, and veteran educators, which could include teachers or administrators, they chunked them together in this stat. Well, 68% of them are experiencing burnout. And All of this is contributing to our new norm about education, about mental health, the dwindling teacher candidates, and just all of the
Yeah.
negative narratives that are out there about teaching. I can't even tell you how many people that I know who have young children who are trying to decide what they want to do as a profession, and they're telling them to avoid
Oh,
education. And it just
100.
hurts.
It
Yes.
breaks mine too, but I think it's a real thing because those of us that have been here a while know these stats, and we
Yeah.
also know the
Yes.
feeling.
Yes.
I mean,
True.
I left teaching many years ago for these reasons, and it's way more stressful than it was then. I mean, so it is very heartbreaking to those of us that want good teachers in the classroom because we're desperately trying to figure out what we can do to help make the change so they want to stay and that
Yeah.
others want to join them.
And it's impacting within the school buildings as well with emotional contagion, because when teachers are stressed, then students are stressed.
Yeah,
And when students are stressed, behaviors increase.
right.
So it just creates this negative loop of stress behavior.
And when students are stressed, teachers are stressed oftentimes.
Yes, that's true.
It's like, you know,
Cool. Yep,
yeah.
yep. And so I plan on sharing one simple strategy that you can walk away from this webinar and start tomorrow and yield great results with. And it's all backed in neuroscience. It's so simple, actually, that you may be thinking that there's no way it will work, but it will, and it does. And then I'm going to share some teacher tools that are, it's very exciting because it's just dropping now. It's gone live and we'll be launching next week, but it's a tool that develops resilience. So I'm excited to share that as well. But before we dive into that, I was going to take you 15 years back, 11 years into my career. That's a picture of my family from back then. My daughters in that picture are 4 and 6. And now they're a sophomore in college and a senior in college.
Time flies.
Yes, exactly. And during this time, I was part of a leadership team in the school where I worked. And there was one teacher in particular at this building that changed my perspective on how I approached leadership and my priorities as a leader. And so this teacher in her first year, she showed up on fire. She was so confident. She had no problem with any student in her room. Her classroom was a very happy place to be, and she could implement any kind of instructional strategy that we were sharing with the staff in really amazing ways. We were all incredibly excited that she was part of our teaching team. It wasn't until her second year something major shifted. And I'm not sure what it was, but she was a completely different person during her second year in the profession. Her classroom was not a happy place to be. The students were out of control, and she was honestly having a hard time even making it through the day. So we had a couple of coaches in this building. We had a coach team, and they had already gone in to work with her quite a bit already, trying to give her some instructional strategies that would help her feel more successful getting through the day, and was having limited success. So by the time I was asked to go in and meet with her, I was planning and preparing myself for a conversation to coach her out of the profession, unfortunately. When I went in, though, it turned into something completely different. So I sat down with her and she immediately started to cry, and I could tell that she was just completely beat down. And that's when I reminded myself that she had a great first year. So I knew that she had the skill set. And that's when I did something that was unexpected. And I didn't really have a plan for it going in, but we decided to come up with a plan for her well-being. And we focused on that for the next few weeks. And I tell you what, that was transformational for her and for me, because I had never done that with a teacher before. But she completely flourished, and we got to see that same teacher from her first year again. And she actually went on to become a reading coach, and then even after that, an administrator.
Wow.
And that exactly, and that experience itself really helped me change my perspective on things. And I started to prioritize teacher well-being first and foremost above everything else.
I love that.
So then take you forward 5 years, 2013. I do have a picture. I tried to find it. I have a picture standing in front of my first building where I was principal, and my family was with me. And I really wanted to drop it in here, but I couldn't find it. So you're getting a picture of my daughters from 2013.
And I think Colorado.
It is Colorado,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
even though we're in Nebraska.
That's okay. Colorado is a neighbor. We love our neighbors. So that's okay.
And my oldest daughter goes to college there now. So it's
Excellent.
circle. Yeah. But when I became principal, I promised myself and my teachers that I was going to focus on teacher well-being just as much, if not more, than the instructional leadership part of my job. So the first 4 years, everything was going so well. I was rocking it. Everyone was rocking it. The building was such a happy place to be. The teachers were thriving. The improvements that we had in school and student performance were incredible and exciting to share. We had lots of things to celebrate.
And this is why I know you. See, I was on the school board and I didn't know all of the names of the principals, right? I mean, it's a fairly large school district. I knew most of them, but not all of them. But this was one of the reasons, is that I knew that teachers liked working with you.
Yeah.
They would tell me if they didn't, trust me. And so I knew, and I had never really heard that before. I mean, one of the reasons I ran for school board was because there were so many teachers who were unhappy with leadership, and the superintendent was new and made a lot of changes in hiring, and I was so impressed. So I know this is true even from a school board standpoint, because I heard it.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, it was an incredible year, and I even started a podcast and even had a subscription box. That was so much fun to curate. But the podcast and the subscription box that people received in the mail all were geared towards developing that mental grit for educators. Following that, I stayed at the same school, but the district asked me to also lead a second school. So I was the principal at 2 schools, traveling between the 2. And it was an incredible experience. And I enjoyed everything that I learned from the people there and from that experience. I will tell you that my time was stretched thin, and that I was being challenged in my own mental grit and resilience with this experience. But I stuck with it for 3 years and loved it. I wouldn't have left, but the district then did ask me to take on a building that was in a neighborhood of high poverty. And the neighborhood was significantly impacted by trauma, which then trickled into the schools. And I know that many principals and teachers can relate to that. It was so significant that my priorities had to shift because it became almost urgent. So I wasn't able to focus on teacher well-being as much as I wanted to, even though it was needed a lot in this.
Yeah.
I had to focus my attention on keeping teachers and students safe and on protecting the instructional time for students rather than teacher well-being. It's not that it was completely void, but I couldn't focus on it as much as I wanted.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I think lots of people can relate to that too.
Oh,
I'm the
100%.
only one who has experienced this. I think this is becoming more and more common
I think
for
so.
many principals.
Yeah.
And so that's why I returned to the research and the science of happiness, specifically these 5 components. So cultivating optimism, developing coping strategies, committing to goals, taking care of your body and soul, and prioritizing social connections. And as we look at these, as a principal within the school setting, I knew that I couldn't impact all of them, but I wanted to know what I had the most influence over. And from those 5 components, we can significantly impact cultivating optimism, and we can influence certain pieces of that goal commitment, especially if we think about it in the context of school improvement. So if we know that we can do that, we want to find ways to become experts in it and then merge those 2 things together, cultivating optimism and school improvement. And as we think about school improvement, I wanted to kick off with this quote: "People grow the most under positive attention and the least under negative feedback." And feedback is something I think we can all relate to as school leaders because we see the importance of it. We know it's a priority, and oftentimes it's a huge piece of our school improvement efforts. So I think this is a good place to start. And this is actually what our strategy that I'm going to share with you is rooted in, is the feedback that we're giving and how we're giving it. Because the hard truth is, there is research out there that's telling us that the traditional feedback is no longer giving us much lift. There's feedback that Snapchat has used and has helped in its success, but the research that I'm going to focus on is research clear back in the 1930s. It was one of the first studies actually in regards to feedback and attention. And so there was this factory in Chicago that wanted to increase the productivity of their workers. And so for this study, they were varying the factors of the environment of the factory to see what impacted productivity the most. So they started with adding brighter lights. And as you could anticipate, productivity increased because that's something positive that's happening. They extended breaks, and again, productivity increased. And they brought in food, productivity increased. Okay, perfect. This is exactly what we were expecting, right? Let's start peeling back the layers of these things that we added. So they went back to the regular lights, and it surprised them because productivity increased. They went back to regular breaks. Productivity increased. They took away the food and productivity increased again. So they were completely baffled. It wasn't at all what they were expecting, and they didn't know what to do next. And so they stopped the study. When they stopped the study, that's when productivity decreased. And so what they came up with from this study is that it's not about what you're doing, it's just about you're doing something. When the workers knew that they were part of this study, they knew that they were getting attention, and attention is all they wanted. And so productivity increased. When the study stopped, the attention stopped and productivity decreased. So when we think about feedback, we can also think about it in the terms or in the idea of providing attention to our teachers. Gallup, 80 years later in 2009, jumped on this study. They wanted to know specifically what kind of attention increases engagement in the workplace. So the study in the 1930s just established that any kind of attention will increase engagement. Gallup wanted to know what kinds of attention make a difference. And so if we look here, that red line is basically it's demonstrating that you're ignoring the people that you work with.
I did have a supervisor like that, I will say. Like, that doesn't help engagement if you just
Right.
ignore people. Really
Exactly.
doesn't help.
Yes. So engagement completely plummets when that's the case. And so we want to avoid that red line there. The yellow line represents attention or feedback that's rooted in opportunities for growth. And so it looks like it's a stagnant line, but it really isn't. It's just because of this graph. There was growth between September and May when the feedback was rooted in opportunities for growth. The green line represents a focus on strengths. And so that's feedback and attention that's given when it's rooted in strengths. And I can guarantee that none of this is surprising to anyone that's watching. Everyone knows that when you focus on strengths, you'll reap the benefits. It's not going to surprise anyone that focusing on strengths is 30 times more powerful than focusing on those opportunities for growth. So here's where I'm going to challenge you, because when we are going into classrooms and providing feedback to teachers from our walkthroughs, we live on that yellow line. We may provide some positive feedback, but we always tag on something that's an opportunity for growth. And we will see some growth as this yellow line is showing, but we won't see as much growth if we just stop with the strengths.
I like it.
So traditional feedback, like I said, it's not that it's void of any positive feedback. There are usually affirming comments in our traditional feedback models, but it also includes that feed forward feedback or that opportunity for growth. So some examples that I've been trained on and have used are the feedback models that include like an I wonder statement or the two glows and a grow. Are those things that you have heard of or familiar with, Cindy?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So those would be considered those traditional feedback models that I'm referring to. And Megan, this is where you will appreciate our same experiences with this. But I was elated, actually, Cindy, when Kathy Kennedy came to us in 2010 to share her 30-second feedback model focused on strengths. It's a pretty simple model, as you can see. It just starts with a positive statement, and then you identify the teacher move that is rooted in strength and how that impacts student learning. And then you end with a strength. And that's it. We were supposed to stop there. That was it. We were supposed to go into classrooms, identify this, leave it for the student and walk, or I'm sorry, leave it for the teacher and walk out. Now, after this training, there were multiple instructional coaches and principals that just couldn't stop there. They thought they were leaving something on the table or missing the mark by not adding on that opportunity for growth. And so they went in, they used her model, but then they added their own statements. By the way, have you considered, da, 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 and they ruined it. They ruined it. Oh my gosh.
We aren't sure though, Amber, just to clarify that that's specifically her like patented strategy. We just know that
Sure.
that's how what she came to
Yes.
share. Okay.
I learned it from her, but since then, and actually just recently, I've heard of two other people who are introducing this strategy as their own. And so,
You don't know whose strategy it
oh,
is.
I don't know. I don't
But
know
it's
what
a good one.
it is. It is.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
okay. Yes, yes. And here's why. Because when you're just focusing on the strengths, it's creating possibility and it's
Mhm.
empowering for the teacher. It's capturing what's going well. It's leaning into their strengths and it's promoting growth. And neuroscience is telling us this. It's all backed by neuroscience. So positive attention accelerates growth of new neurons, which then accelerates and creates these new neural pathways in our brain up to the prefrontal cortex. And that's where all of the growth happens. It allows the brain to be more receptive to new information, and it nurtures growth by making more connections. When they tagged on that I wonder statement or that growth statement, it truly just feeds limiting beliefs. And when teachers read that, they instantly get defensive because you were only in there for 10 or 15 minutes and now you're telling me that I missed out on something. Well, I did this earlier in the day, or I
Right.
did this activity yesterday.
Or of
So,
course I incorporate cooperative learning. Yeah,
yes,
no
yes.
doubt. Right.
So they instantly get defensive. And when you get defensive, the message gets stuck in the amygdala. It ignites this fight, flight, or freeze mode of our brain, and it prevents anything from getting to this prefrontal cortex where growth happens. So when we tag on what we think is this harmless strategy, it actually slows down the growth of our teachers. This is what we want to do. This is where the power is. We want to do more of this strength-based attention for our teachers. Now, I have shared this idea many, many times before, and I get many people that think I'm just being completely unrealistic. And people are like, well, I'm a realist. There is no way. There is too much that needs to happen in my building. Sorry, I'm trying to toggle all these pictures around here, all of our images. Anyway, there are people here who think that that this is just unrealistic because there is too much that needs to happen. There are too many negative things. There are too many opportunities for growth. We have so much that we need to get accomplished. So I wanted to pause here just to address that a little bit because I don't expect any principal to be walking the halls with blinders on. I recognize that there are things that need to be addressed always. And I'm not asking anyone to ignore those things. We need to address the things that need to be addressed. The only thing that this is asking principals to do is to keep a heightened focus
Mhm.
on the positives and the strengths and the talents and the excellence that the teachers are bringing to the classroom every day. This might help a little. I have an example of the layers of support that we often offer teachers. And so we're not just talking about
Mm.
strength-based attention and isolation. This is part of the layering that we can offer our teachers. And this is the typical example of that. And so we often have instructional coaching, professional learning. What we're talking about now is that strength-based attention, constructive feedback, and evaluative feedback. Typically, 20% of our layers of support is focused in some kind of version of strength-based attention, whereas 80% is constructive feedback. And what I'm going to challenge people to do is to flip that. And so when we can consider 80% of our support for teachers rooted in strength-based attention versus 80% of constructive feedback, we're going to get huge changes in our school culture. And because of that, we're going to see incredible growth with our school improvement efforts.
And also, because of that switch, wouldn't teachers then be more receptive to learning and growing or improving in certain ways? I mean, isn't that's obviously not just the only goal, but it just makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
When I'm feeling good, I'm more willing to pay attention to what you are trying to teach me in professional learning.
Right.
But when I'm exhausted, I'm pretty much going to be on my phone or like scribbling on a notepad while you're trying to tell me something new, right?
Right. Right. Exactly. So how can we accomplish this 80% support focused or rooted in strength-based attention? It all starts by starting in your calendar and prioritizing your
Mhm.
time. So this is a very starting point, the very low level, but it's a perfect starting point. And so if principals can chunk out just 30 minutes 3 times a week, you'll get into 6 to 9 teachers' classrooms at that point, because the visits usually only take 10 to 15 minutes. I don't know why Kathy Kennedy or anyone else calls them 30-second feedback, because it takes more than 30 seconds, but it certainly doesn't take longer than 15 minutes to get in, see something wonderful happening, and then get out. And so if you can chunk 30 minutes 3 times a week, you'll get into 6 to 9 teachers' classrooms. Also, understanding your teachers will help you prioritize your time. And so our strongest teachers represent about 20% of our staff. I think most people would relate and agree with that percentage. I think what's shocking to people, though, is our strongest teachers also have the most potential for growth. So they'll always remain 40% developed with 60% growth potential. That's hard for people to wrap their head around because they're the strongest teachers. But if we think about it, they're the strongest teachers because they are the flexible thinkers. They know how to adapt and learn, and they have an incredibly high rate of growth. So their growth rate is much faster than maybe the other teachers of your staff. Their 10 that they give you today is their 7 tomorrow. And so this is something for us to keep in mind when we're prioritizing our time. The
Say that
class
again. Their 10 of their giving today is the 7. What's that mean?
So if you had to rate a teacher on a scale from 1 to 10, and you go into this teacher's classroom and you're like, oh my gosh, that was a 10. Well, then when you go in the next day, it becomes their 7, because they are constantly, that 10 is now their
Oh, I
7.
see.
You go in
Okay.
the next day and they're even better. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I was thinking, oh, they just did their best on that day, and then you came back and they 30% less
No, they're
effective.
constantly growing. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
changed the scale. All right, got it.
So then the classic teachers in your building represent about 40% of your staff. And these teachers are doing good things. They're coming in, they're showing up, wanting to do their best. They do what they're told. They just happen to be more rigid of thinkers. And
Mhm.
so they still have great growth potential, but it's not as substantial as your strongest teachers, because of the point in their career they are, or maybe just their growth mindset. It could be a variety of reasons, but because they're more of a rigid thinker, it's not as substantial as it is for the strongest teachers. And then there's the developing and the struggling teachers, which represents about 20% each of your staff. So, developing teachers could be the newer teachers. Struggling teachers, it could be that they're struggling temporarily from something personal in their life, or it could be someone who is just finding the profession incredibly challenging. So, for the developing and the struggling teachers, typically school leaders already have additional layers of support for these groups of teachers, the developing teachers and the struggling teachers. And oftentimes they just need space to grow into that.
And they're not always static in the same category either, because
Absolutely.
I know that as a teacher back in the day, there were certain students that perhaps pushed me a little harder than maybe I had the year before, and some of which I struggled with perhaps a little bit differently. You know, you get in the groove and you know what works, and then all of a sudden, students like to remind you that, oh no, I'm different. That doesn't work because I'm, special, and they are all special and unique in their own way. So there were times that I struggled, that I wanted to do what was right and improve, but I needed extra support. So it isn't necessarily that the teacher is struggling from their lack of skill, but they might be struggling for their lack of skill with a particular student, or yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because this is a continuum. So the teachers can move within each of these categories, and they can move within each of these categories even within the same day.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And so you're, thinking about an elementary classroom,
Yes.
your strongest teacher may be strong in the area of reading,
Mhm.
but she may be a developing teacher in the area of math.
Are you talking about me, Amber? I think you're talking about me. Yeah, I
Oh,
can really.
you're right. It depends on all of the environmental factors
Right.
and the context of everything. So it is a continuum, and the percentages that I gave you and the categories that I gave you, those are all generalized and just a very broad term and idea to help you identify and prioritize your time of which classrooms to get into and why. So I'm going to talk about that next. Thinking about if we were to have a staff of 35, I'm going to take you through 4 weeks. So an entire month of how and when you would prioritize your time to get in to leave this attention, or I'm sorry, strength-based attention for these teachers. So week 1, you would identify your strongest classic and developing teachers. And I have 9 teachers identified there. That is my goal every week. And so the following week, I just cycle over, identify my next group of strongest teachers, my next group of classic, and then my developing and struggling. And you'll notice I've already cycled through all of my strongest teachers by week 2. Week 3, I start over with the cycle for strongest teachers, continue over, identifying my next group of teachers for classics, and then same for developing and struggling.
And does this mean you're spending a little bit more time with the developing and struggling teacher by chance and giving feedback, just based on having more in the strongest
Yeah,
teacher?
that's such a great question, and I'm going to get to that in just.
Okay. Okay.
Yep, that is a common question that I get. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Well,
You'll
I'm
know
pretty common, so it's just the questions come to me. But yeah, that's what I was thinking.
you're definitely not common.
It's okay.
So by the end of week 4, I've cycled through my strongest teachers twice, my classic
Wow.
teachers once, and developing and struggling teachers not quite yet. I'm still working through that cycle. And by
Okay.
the end of my second month, I'll work through the cycle of them. So before I address what your question was, the developing and struggling teachers, another common thing that is brought up is, yeah, this is nice, but this never happens no matter how intentional I try to be, because something urgent always comes up or something unplanned always comes up. So I wanted to talk about that first. When you have an unexpected busy week, no matter how intentional you are. So let's say that you were planning on going in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 30 minutes each of those days, but then something urgent happened on Tuesday, out of the question. Something urgent happens on Wednesday. Now you can't get into classes anymore. So now you're left with one day, Thursday. What most people are inclined to do is, since the classic developing and struggling teachers appear to be needing more support, that's where they tend to
Yeah.
schedule their time. But I am going to challenge you or suggest that you do quite the opposite. And the reason is because our strongest teachers, if you remember, are only 40% developed and have a 60% growth potential, which is incredible. What also is incredible is that the strongest teachers, even though they only represent 20% of your staff, they're also bringing in 80% of your results. Now, that 80% can present itself in different ways. Your strongest teachers are usually your mentors. They usually serve on your leadership team, and the growth of their students usually exceeds the growth of other typical classrooms. So if you have to prioritize your time even more than those 9 teachers, then you're going to want to prioritize your strongest teachers.
I love this. And one of the reasons why I think this would work and is appealing is that it seems like it would be more inviting to the principal.
Right.
I
Yes.
mean, why wouldn't? I mean, these are the people that you love. So it
Yes.
seems like
Yes.
you're telling me that I get to spend more time with the strongest teachers? Like, really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And
So
it,
it should be a win-win.
absolutely. It kind of reminds me of that saying, when mom is happy, everyone's
Everyone's
happy.
happy.
Well, when the principal's happy, everyone's happy, right?
Correct.
Kind of that
Correct.
same.
And the 20% of your strongest teachers actually do have a lot of impact and influence on the rest of the staff. And
Absolutely.
so when they start to fail, I think then the ship really starts to sink, because when some of the struggling teachers look at the strongest teachers, because we all know, we know who they are, and
Yep.
you start to see them failing, you're like, well, if they can't do it, then
Right.
no one can. What am I even trying for?
Right. You're exactly right.
Yep.
You're exactly right. Okay, so to address your question about the developing and struggling teachers, you're not necessarily spending more time in their
Okay.
classroom focusing on that strength-based attention, but you're not ignoring them either. No one's ignoring anyone here. What I ask people to do is just shift that into positive interactions instead. So, and again, this is a very generalized statement because I know that principals are having these positive interactions with everyone across the board. But when you're more intentional about them with your developing and struggling teachers, it goes a long way. They are just trying to grow into the space around them right now. And so you just stopping them and giving them a smile and checking in on them and asking them how their meeting with their mentor was yesterday after school and just expressing genuine care and concern for them will replace that 80% for the strength-based attention. That strength-based attention can be overwhelming for developing and struggling teachers in the beginning, just because they already have so many other layers of support that they're trying to process through. So we can capture that 80% through those positive interactions.
And you're not saying that the positive interaction needs to be a handwritten note specific to their instruction.
No,
Okay.
this is just general positive interactions.
Minus not talking about their appearance, because we're not talking about, hey, I like your hair and
Oh,
those. I mean, do you know what I mean? Because I have seen people thinking that a compliment is the same. Like, that's not quite the attention we're seeking.
yes. No, 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 no. Even though there's nothing wrong with those things.
Well, sometimes there is something wrong with that, but it depends. Like, if that's the only thing you're going to talk about,
Yes.
I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah. No, these are just positive interactions that include genuine concern and care for them
Right.
as a teacher in the profession.
Okay.
So that's how you would supplement that 80% for them.
Okay.
Okay, so that was the one simple strategy. And I told you, it seems so incredibly simple that
I love it.
you're going to want to bat your eyes at it. It is actually pulled from a 6-module course that I have offered in the past. So there are more complexities to it, but this is the basic idea that anyone can take and run with and yield immediate results in their building. So the challenge is to be very intentional about it and to get out your calendar and to schedule looking for this talent and this excellence throughout your building, because it will create a lot of momentum. When you start doing this, teachers are going to realize that they're good enough, that they're smart enough, and that they're great teachers. And that's exactly what you want. You want your teachers feeling confident. You want them to repeat those things that you recognize so that you're seeing more of that. They'll feel more energized and they'll realize that their growth is within their control.
And you want them to look like this person.
Yes,
Yay! Yeah,
dancing down the hallway.
I love it. Those are my people.
This idea of this strength-based attention really allows us to capitalize on cultivating optimism and merging that with school improvement. So, what about all of these other components that I started us off with? And that's where this other additional teacher tool that I mentioned comes into play. And this is an app actually that I'm super excited about. It's called TeacherWell, and it goes, like I said, it's live today.
I'm super excited about this. You get the firsthand information about this. This was not that we've been planning this webinar for a couple months, and so I know you've been working really hard, and I
Yes.
know it was delayed numerous times. So I'm really excited about
I
this.
know. I'm so excited. It officially launches on Monday, the Monday
Okay.
before Thanksgiving, but it is live now, so anyone has access to it. But within the app, it's designed specifically for teachers to develop resilience, to help teachers handle stress, and it incorporates a lot of self-care practices within the app. Oops, I'm sorry. So within the app, it also has really powerful podcasts and book summaries that are all rooted in self-improvement and well-being. It sparks inspiration and inner strength. And what I love about it is that it's on the go. So teachers can incorporate it into their life however it fits best for them. All of the tools within the app help teachers navigate the stressors of the day. And what I love is that it's curated specifically for teachers because the hardships of the job are unique to educators. And it's all backed by science. So everything within the app is going to create these sustainable ways of dealing with stress in the job. So when you invest in teacher well-being, your school community reaps the benefits. And I had to pull in one more study here. This is an example of 3 organizations that do prioritize well-being. And in this study, they were looking at the increase in the performance after 1 year. Oops, I'm sorry. My daughter's trying to FaceTime me.
It's okay. It's important. Talk about well-being. Yeah.
So the first 2 organizations, the red and the yellow there, they prioritize well-being in typical ways. And so what that looks like is making sure that they have positive leadership. And you mentioned EAP programs earlier, and so they made sure that they had EAP programs as well. And you can see that they did increase their performance after 1 year. When we look at the third organization there, they did the same thing, except, oops, I'm sorry. I'm having problems with my computer here. They did the same thing, except they layered it with some additional support. So they had the positive leadership, they had the EAP programs, but then they added some systematic supports like the TeacherWell app. And performance increased even more by 25%.
Wow,
and if you dig into that to see how quickly that growth happened, it was 1 calendar year. Their baseline was 63% in January. And then the following January, they were at an 88% performance rate.
that's awesome.
So we know that focusing on all of these components makes a huge difference, right? Many people may wonder why, but the evidence and the answers are right there in front of us because we'll have teachers showing up that are feeling more positive, more resilient, better immune systems, better leaders. And honestly, who wouldn't want that in their school, right?
Right, exactly.
So your action step, or anybody who's watching, their next action steps are to hop into their calendar and be really intentional about getting into classrooms to provide that that strength-based attention. And then if they want to amp it up even more, then they can access TeacherWell. So you can look for TeacherWell and learn more about it at the website here, teacherwellapp.com, or you can scan that QR code, or it's available in the App Store.
And do you have is there an opportunity for people to learn about get a kind of a free trial with the app, or how does it work?
Yeah.
How
So
do you sample it?
starting Monday, there is a promotion where if you buy an annual subscription, you get $10 off.
Okay.
But if you go to the website, it really does break down what's available in the app and how it functions.
Okay. And do you want to talk about the price or do you want to?
Yeah, so you can get a monthly subscription for $7.99.
Okay. That seems very affordable. Okay.
Yeah, and the annual rate is 84,
Okay.
which is a deal in comparison.
Yep.
And that's if you purchase it as an individual. And so there's two options with this app. It was first designed for schools. And so there are group plans where a principal would purchase this for their teachers. And it's truly an incredible gift that they would be giving their teachers. And it has tools within it so that the principal can prioritize well-being it's gamified, so you can earn points and badges within the app, but the principal can capitalize that as part of the school culture as well. But as we were developing it as a group plan or a group app, we decided to also offer it on an individual basis. So the individual subscriptions actually came later in the development.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I love it. And does the principal, I know this, I've asked this question, but I think it's important for people to know. As part of a group plan, does the principal get private teacher information about their well-being that maybe the teacher wouldn't want them to?
So when you log into the app, you will complete a 10-question inventory, and that's how the app personalizes your needs based off of how you answered. And then you'll be prompted to complete different challenges or listen to different podcasts from a large menu that you can choose from. But the principal doesn't have access to what you are accessing within the app.
Okay. Or to your answers to your questions.
No. Oh gosh,
Yeah.
no.
Okay. Okay.
I will say that if your principal purchases a group plan, there is the ability for for the teacher to check in with the principal to let them know that, they're ready for the day, they will be ready for the day, or it's going to be a tough day.
But it's not required. It's a choice
It's
that
not required.
Yeah.
Yep, it's an option. And
Okay.
the principal does have access to that.
Okay. Only if they choose to allow them to have access, though. I think that's important. Okay, very cool. Megan, do you have any questions in the chat or anything I can address? I know Wendy had to leave, but I know we're running out of time here and I don't want to keep you, okay, great. I think we covered everything. I am so excited about this opportunity. I think I'm anxious to look at what is offered because I know there's a lot in there. And I am just looking forward to seeing some of that and knowing, what to expect. Like what does this look like? I have no idea. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I think this is great. Megan's looking at the website right now. So I'll be sure to share this information. I'm excited again, because I think this is a wonderful tool. You shared terrific information, some of which that I have not heard shared in the way that you've shared it. So I love to learn new things. So I'm excited about that.
Thanks, Cindy.
And as somebody who works with employees, not just in K-12, but in higher ed as well, I love to be able to add some of this research. I think this applies obviously to any field. And some of our higher ed staff have been facing a tremendous amount of turnover and stress as well. So it isn't just, I think, a lot of industries, but a lot of education in general. So don't leave out that market, because I think there might be another market for you in higher ed perhaps someday. So anyway, Amber, I just want to thank you for taking the time to do this. And I want to thank you, Megan, also for joining us and caring a lot about this topic.